Okay, great. I've got myself arranged in two mirrors, and I'm going to work in graphite pencil, and I'm going to develop the drawing. A lot of the drawing will be developed over in a tonal sense. The drawing is a little bit above life size so that I can focus on the forms. And the main purpose of this evening is going to be to push the shapes further and to get to a better sense of coordinated value as I work from life in the mirror. All right, so if you want to go ahead and start timing, Catherine, that would be great, please. Thank you for being here, by the way. I've got two lights on myself. I've got a light coming in on this side, which is a hot light. So if I make this motion with my pencil, you will be reminded of the importance of the light coming in that direction. And I've got a cool light dropping down in this direction. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm just going to mute everybody.
Okay, thank you for doing so. So what I'm going to do is working with the F pencil, F is in Frank. I'm going to start laying out a tonality to isolate the two light sources. So I'm just using a really fuzzy tone right now. Not really focusing too much on hatch mark, just really on tonal separation. Hey, Catherine, if you have any questions or chat questions come in, just let me know and I'll try to sound intelligent.
Okay, sounds good.
I try to make it a point as I'm laying out the tone to keep the tone as even as possible and to be thinking about the development of a broad, simple pattern of value that I can then draw into, because what I want to draw into is not really paper. I want to draw on top of pencil, if that makes any sense. Another thing about getting going with this is I want to test out the feel of the graphite. Make sure it feels fluid. You know, I should say fluid in the right capacity. Again, can you hear me or not?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So the other day we were doing a panel discussion at Incamminati. And Alex Ganevsky said something interesting. He said he really loves oil paint because it performs at the same speed at which he thinks. The same speed at which he thinks. I thought it was a wonderful, profound statement. And that's kind of what you're looking for in your pencil and in your paint. Sometimes people will find that, this is what Alex was saying, that watercolor moves too quickly for the way he thinks. He thinks a little slower. He finds a perfect synchronicity between the speed of oil paint and the speed of his thought process. And that's kind of what I'm getting at with the graphite. Does the graphite move too quickly or does it move nice and slow?
And there's a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead. If you could speak up a little louder.
Oh, okay, sorry. So someone's asking if at one point we can see how your mirror is set up, if we can see the second mirror.
Yeah, sure. Maybe on break I'll show you. That's okay.
Okay. And another one is, what paper are you using?
Strathmore 400, 80-pound weight, brown cover. The mirrors that I have set up, I'll show you, are essentially set up like a right angle. And I do that so I can reflect myself twice. If anybody hasn't done a double mirror self-portrait, it's kind of a fun thing, but it's not easy to set up. It's kind of tedious, but once you get it set up, it's really quite fun. So today we talked a little bit about the mark making on the cheekbone and comparing that off of the ear. That's essentially what I'm trying to do in this instance, is to pull hatch mark from a diagonal standpoint across the ear this way. And I'm going to go ahead and carry the same notion, the same idea, down into my own neck. And then also to get the paper covered. This right here is part of setting up the planar structure. which relates to some of the anatomy in the portrait. Right at the there. So the nice thing about getting this laid in is the unity with which it can exhibit. There should be a kind of a strong connection between these areas. Talking about this area through here.
Dan, there's a question.
Yeah, go ahead. I can't quite hear you though.
Oh, that's strange.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay. It's so are you covering the whole, is there a reason for covering the whole paper? Are you losing the lights?
Well, I want graphite to cover most of what's going on here so that I can work back into it, because it's easier to get hatch mark to play effectively if it's already dropping into an existing area of hatch. So it's also quite light. So if I were to go in and make a darker dark, which I'll try to do, most of what I've got here is going to disappear. It's actually kind of similar to those who have drawn a lot of tone paper, because when you drop some tone in, everything kind of feels less important, and it allows you to renew the accents. So that's an example right there, where I take the zygomatic and I just kind of sink it back into the tone that's around it, and it should feel like I can go back and refresh it later. So now I can go in and start to push some of this value a little deeper.
Dan, what pencil are you using now?
Right now I'm using a B. B has a kind of soft quality, like almost a dirty quality. It's very mass oriented. Whereas if I go to an F, which is where I am now, it's a lot drier. It's not like mass. It's more like bone.
Dan, could you show the point you're using as the corner for your zygomatic?
I can't hear you. What did you say?
Oh my gosh. Could you use the point? Could you show the point that you're using as your corner for the zygomatic?
Yeah, sure. Right there. Right there. So if I'm playing off of the plane, see, you go here, go there, then I go up in here. See, so all of that stuff moves up to that moment and needs to play off of it. And if it works, it's going to be great. It's just, it's not easy to make it work because it's such a crazy, weird area. Like we look at the zygomatic as we did today quite a bit, and it's such a key constructive player. So confusing, so elusive. We spent a good bit of time playing it like it's a shelf. And so I've got that kind of block-like construction in there. At least it's a beginning, but it's also weird how elliptical the whole thing can be when you think about it. And we talked earlier today about tucking the zygomatic bone, in a sense, behind the ear, and that's why this is the darkest area in the drawing at this point in time. So I'm going to drop these in. These are not so much markers for tone as they are identifiers of the cranial structure. If I can get this point back just a little bit more, I'm thinking I'll be able to do a better job at conveying a sense of the inner geometry of the cranium. Good place for an accent right there in the under region, and that can tie in to the areas of sternomastoid, and then later to trapezius, depending on the situation. So in this case, what I want to do is go in and carve out a little more space. I'm using a harder lead than what I had there. This one is back to B lead. And the reason is I don't want the graphite to get too out of control. What this is going to do is it's going to push all the way up to the sinus area there. I'm going to have to be very clear on. Drop that in.
That was 20 minutes. Okay. And there's one question. Are you using F for the hair?
Can you say it again?
Are you using an F pencil for the hair?
I am using F pencil with what was that last word that you said?
On the hair.
On the hair. I was using something that's it's more like a 6B in the hair. So what I'll do oftentimes is I'll go in and work my H range for a while, and then I'll jump to a really soft lead, and I'll go back to my H range. I just like to go back and forth because of the way that the textures change. It's almost like burnishing a softer graphite with a harder graphite does something kind of magical, and it remakes the texture of skin or something. I can't quite describe it, but in the drawings that I love to look at, like Menzel or something, you get a nice sense of the appreciation of texture and the capacity of the material to show texture in a very characteristic way, like when Menzel shows fur versus when Menzel shows skin or something like that. Hold on a second. So we're on a quick break, so let me change my camera over and show you the arrangement. Just give me 2 seconds so that my PowerPoint can load. Okay. Okay, I'm back. So let's do a shared screen. Advanced version of screen. So this is the arrangement of the space that I have right now to answer that question. Not everybody in the audience right now is in the workshop. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm standing here. That's my head, or what should be my head, or what's left of my head, something like that. And I'm drawing here, and I'm looking at my image, which is reflecting that way and this way. And because I'm able to look at two different reflections, I can study the way that my head appears at a very unusual angle over on this side, where it's kind of tilted this way. And I'm also looking at the way that my head is depicted on this other side and through there. And that's really kind of the amazing thing about the 3/4 self-portrait, the double mirror, because it shows me an opportunity. It reveals for me an opportunity to study my own cheekbone in the mirror. So I'm really looking at that image of myself. And I can then go to the paper, which is, in this case, the paper is in front of, no, sorry, the paper is behind the mirror.
papers behind the mirror so that I can get a larger sense of my image in the mirror and a smaller sense of my image on the paper. So I get more detail from life, that is to say. So that's sort of what I'm doing. Sorry for all the clutter, but you see my anatomy man right there next to me on the, this is Dr. Paul Richet's Anatomy Écorché from the 19th century. Does that answer your question in terms of how the things are arranged?
I think so.
Okay. Good deal. All right. Any other questions?
No, that's all for now.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I do recommend it. And so, yeah, I could keep going if you want.
Yeah, you have 2 minutes left. I'll break.
Okay. Well, if anybody wants to step back and take a break, that's great. I'll take a shot of this image so that I can talk through it tomorrow during the workshop.
Dan, should I start timing 20?
Yeah, go ahead. Time for 20, Catherine, please. Thank you. So what I want to do now is look inside of the eye socket and see if I can manipulate the eye socket to give me that diagonal affinity that I'm looking for. That can reaffirm some shadow shapes. Then I'm going to go for some more accents. I'll go jump back and forth through the hair and the face, but mostly I'm after the arrangement of landmarks in the face. So one of the things about laying out the tone as I have is I can reflect what's going on with the light effect. The light effect really shows me a lot of the landmarks themselves. So I made the point today of trying to be a good light designer. Always, always try to be a really good lighting designer in the way you set up your portraits. Because you'll benefit from how much that aestheticizes, if you want to call it that, the form of the model, be it of yourself or of your sitter. And then this area here, kind of reaching for a connection with, it's a fun area to draw because it seems to keep changing. And it commingles with these other sections that involve the philtrum and a kind of natural concavity in the face. So I get into some of this stuff and I'm crossing the red lip portion into that philtrum. That's a good place to leave some breathing space. It's a curious shape, but I'm going to hold on to it for a minute. Because I'd rather have a lot of crossing routes run through a mouth than to draw in lips and hope for the best. Next thing I want to do is to pull back on the curtain of the face back here and kind of push the area behind the chin. It's important to get the structure to work that way. Then the chin can be incorporated into perspective. And then this is a fun thing too. This is the mentalis muscle. So if I just pile on some tonality right there, I can get that to cut in. There's a little piece of my own face that slices through it. Just fun. If I can get it to work. Like that. I'm going to see these areas lift and slide. The skull muzzle stuff. We took some of this on this afternoon. This is not. This is the front of the chewing muscle, the masseter. And just because of the nature of my own face, I can get some of this to separate. So that's going to throw the muzzle in front and make it more narrow, hopefully. Okay, good. And this is going to be the submental area, the great connector down to the throat. And then I've got the submandibular back in here, which has been swollen all week on the other side of the surgery. Okay, so I can tell you that what I'm trying to do is get set in through here with some of the information as it lifts up. It's a rather complicated area because what I'm trying to do is overlap structure. So we talk about, in many cases, this muzzle shape right here, and it's really amazing, but challenging to get that to happen. Where this is in front of, literally, what's underneath of it, which goes back behind it. And then to make things more challenging, I've got that shadow shape that's lifting up on this side of the tubercle. So I'm going to drop some of that in there and see where it takes me. It does seem to help, doesn't it? To get that tubercle to lay in. This is what the drawings are in many ways all about, which is coordinating the read of the shapes. Because your eye is a very sophisticated instrument, and it continues to reorganize visual information into not only a set of identifiable units, but also an expressive totality of those units. So I always try to bring that point to bear on the people that I work with, that they have to be really good at managing that visual read so that that total read of the units doesn't get misread. But you might have exactly the right placement, but just because of the shading and the grouping, it could be hard to get it to work. For example, here, there's not really an eye in there just yet. It's beginning to happen, but it's fluid enough to allow for room to maneuver. And that's what we want, maneuverability in that region. So I've also got to contend with the idea that I have to spend enough time up in this section. And it's just very, very slightly too indented to look like me. So I can move out slightly. I'm sure many of you have worked a lot from very subtle images, sometimes photos and sometimes life. And so you know just how much you can change a portrait by a very slight difference in contour. So it's no different here in terms of the ramifications of how these edges are shifted.
Dan, that was 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's fine.
Any possibility we could see, oh, I see there, like your reflection in the mirror and to see kind of how it's translating? I don't know if you can show your reflection and prepare the camera at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little challenging because if I turn the camera, then I'm not there.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm looking over here and not sure. I'm trying to study this area, but it won't show up, I think, in this camera because I'd have to change everything around.
Yeah.
I got to reorient it, but yeah, I usually do that during workshops. I'll take a picture of the image that I'm working from, and then we'll set it, disseminate it in the chat.
Yeah.
And go from there.
Yeah, they said that when you back up, we get a glimpse. So maybe if once in a while you can back up.
Where?
Well, now we. I'm not sure.
Like there?
I guess when you're facing the drawing and you're drawing. Yeah, like that.
Oh yeah, I guess there's a little sliver, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, that might be the opposite side of me. You gotta set up things that challenge you, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
Any other questions for? It's funny because I take the a break and I look at this thing and it's opposite on the TV screen, so it's kind of nice that it's opposite angle so I can critique it better.
Yeah, I have a question. Who were or are your influences? Artist influences.
Well, I had a lot of great teachers, and one of the main teachers that I had that I continue to go and think about is Nelson Shanks. And Nelson, I always felt that he wasn't. There are some people here in the audience that also work with him as well. So I am by no means the world authority on Nelson Shanks, but to me, having succeeded him at the Art Students League and having been fortunate enough to be the proprietor of the school that he co-founded, Nelson was the ambassador of urgent achievement. You had to get it done. You had to get it done right. You had to get it done now. And there was something about maneuvering outside of oneself with that urgency of achievement, fulfillment, and raising the game that always got me. It's like it exercised me. It animated me. It motivated me in a way that it's hard to describe. So Nelson was a real force of nature. Another person that I think about that we also lost is Dean Keller. Dean was a very erudite individual. He was a figure drawing teacher. His father had studied with George Bridgman at the Art Students League. And Dean used to talk about the enterprise of art making in the highest possible terms, so that when you did it, it felt like it was an honor, and it felt like you were in a silent conversation with the predecessors that you never met, people like Bridgman and Vanderpool. And I love that way that Dean got me thinking about the kind of the history. I think they call that historiography, like the narrative through history, and how the people that came before us all tried their very best to be better than they could be. I also think about Martha Erlbacher, she was a really terrific anatomy teacher, and miss her a lot because she also had that kind of old school ferocity. And as a teacher, there was no room for negotiation. It was really Martha's way or else. And then I think about Myron Barnstone, who was another teacher of mine, who was an advocate for dynamic symmetry and geometry in the picture. So those are more teacher influences, but I think about them because they're sort of these floating souls that continue to bounce around in my own head, my own mind, and they make me want to be better than I ever could be, to honor their contribution to my own potential, I suppose. But aside from that, it's probably the same as anybody else. I just go to the museum and I marvel at Franz Hals and, you know, Henry O. Tanner and, you know, Sargent and all the rest of them, and I'm just intrigued. It's a good question. Any other questions?
I have, well, thanks for that answer. That was really revealing and telling, and I appreciate your commentary on that. Another question, who would you consider as your contemporaries right now? Or someone you would say, well, wow, he's really on the ball, or she really has it, or he really has it, or, you know, somebody that you kind of think of as a really dynamic artist as well. And, you know, a person who you kind of takes the work out to see what he or she is doing, to kind of, not to keep up with them, but to just kind of see what they're up to, just to kind of gauge where you want to be, or where I know you're an artist, and you're a dynamic artist in your own right, but just those people just keep you on your toes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great question. That's a, you know, it's a, you know, it's a curious thing for me, because I do meet a lot of people that inspire me. I just talked about the panel discussion a minute ago, where, you know, we were listening to Alyssa talk, and then Mary Jane Ansel was speaking about her history, and we had Andrea Couch, who's going to be the commencement speaker, and all of those people really do inspire me. And I meet them, and they have really impressive stories and very clear, distinct personalities. But the one thing that keeps me from being affirmative on the answer is that their stories are not the story that I'm living. And I kind of feel like that gives me purpose, that I'm the only person that can really see within my own story, and they can't see what I'm, you know, looking at and processing and anticipating, nor can I see what they're anticipating. And so, whereas I am very awe-inspired by certain aspects of their lives, there's a healthy separation between what I think I'm seeing in the living and what I've seen in the people that have passed into the world of what was. Because their stories have already been told, and there's a kind of totality to what they've contributed.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Great question.
Dan, that was 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll keep moving and grooving here. Let's see what I can do. Looks like I've got my work cut out for me as it pertains to, I just called it the curtain of the face dropping down. So when I say that, what I mean is that this is almost like a bar shape. As a matter of fact, we talked about it today. I'll show you what I mean exactly. Yes. This is what I'm referring to here. You can see that in the camera, right? So as I try to understand the form moving through, I make the form metaphorically like my heated eraser. And I try to make the form cross that way. So in so much as I can make the form go under, I've got my work cut out for me.
because I really want to allow the form to drop down like a waterfall, overlap the jawbone, but then again, overlap the throat mass. And I'm guessing that'll be a huge boost to the image. We'll see what happens. So there's going to be a thickness here. And when that thickness happens, with any luck, I can get it to happen through an adjustment of lines, similar to drawing the ear, where the ear isn't just a parallel series of lines, but there should be a kind of envelopment. And I lift up the marker there, and I go under and behind the zygomatic. I try to pull that back in space. Going with my darkest dark here. And just kind of embed that tone back behind. That's part of this whole trajectory here. To try to carry the river of form down through the curtain of the face and below. The other thing that we all contend with is the hatch mark. So I want to try to get some sense of the twist of the throat mass climbing. So I'm going to use the stump for that. And as I'm doing this, I don't know if you do the same thing, but ever just kind of like move your throat around? Like it's good to do this during a demo when you have to talk, because you can watch your throat move. You can see where the bone stuff is and where the soft forms are. It's good to have that in the living figure when you're drawing the model too. To watch the model move and break pose. Sometimes at the end of the 20 or at the beginning of the next 20 is some of the best stuff ever. That's going to be the beginning of an anchor shadow. It's going to slide up and around the tubercle right there to give me a basis. And I can then move this way and start to think about that wave there. So we work on that. It's funny because during the process of looking at this stuff, I'm one that kind of likes to obsess on the placements. So I've got this little eraser pencil that I use a lot. It allows me to configure and then reconfigure the position on things like the jaw structure. I usually move this around about 3 or 4 dozen times. But it helps me think about the foreshortening, you know, the jaw and everything else. Really significant anchor form right there. Keep going with it. What that does is it incisors the head. And creates a nice little pocket.
Dan, what is the green pencil? I guess brand and type.
What pencil what?
the green pencil you're using?
The green one?
Is it like a turquoise one or?
Yeah, it's called a Pentel Tough. It's it's got some Japanese writing on it, and I found out that the meaning of the Japanese writing is katikata, which is a kind of pencil that was made for kids. So it fits me perfectly. It's a pencil I think that they used to manufacture in Japan for kids to learn how to write and practice calligraphy. So I use a lot of Japanese pencils that relate to that kind of thing, because I think they were the best pencil manufacturers in the world for a long time. And because of the nature of the quality of the graphite and the way they made their materials, they made some incredibly interesting and high performance materials. So I use a lot of that stuff. Really like the old materials better than the new materials. So most of what I use isn't really around anymore. I got it a while back. But if you can't get it, then Tombow, Mitsubishi are the next best thing. There's that shape of that reed climbing up. Climbs up a little higher. I've got this weird narrow column in my head, so that's what I'm dealing with.
Dan, do you ever find that you've gone too dark, then you need to lighten and erase?
I do sometimes go too dark, yeah, but I don't really worry so much because everything I'm using can be erased. I don't really have much depth in this drawing right now. There's definitely more than there was in the workshop so far, but the only issue is when things get burnished with a stump. But even then, I don't tend to burnish them until I'm really sure that I can go with it. But the great thing about the kneaded eraser is it lifts up pretty effectively. It'll take out a lot of what you don't want relatively easily. If it doesn't do that, you kind of don't want to be using the pencil that you're using. So if I've got a pencil like a Prismacolor, that isn't going to lift up that easily. So I'm not really going to use a Prismacolor. I use a graphite. That's one of the reasons why I experiment so much with the pencils, because I'm looking for that which gives me a sense of permanence without being literally permanent when I put it down. If I wanted total permanence, I'd probably just draw in silver point. So I just lifted that up. It wasn't too much of an issue. The reason I lifted this up is because I want to make sure that I get a solid differentiation on the underside of that jaw plane. If I don't do that, then it'll look too flat, and it's looking a little better. One thing again with it is the perspective. So I can get it to unify, which I'm almost there with. And it should do a combo of unifying and affirming the perspective.
Hey Dan, there's a question.
Yeah, sure.
Is there a difference in the relationship of bone to muscle in the face from in the torso, for example, relating to doing a portrait or figure drawing?
Well, what you're dealing with is edge dynamics. So when you look at bone and muscle in face versus bone and muscle in torso, I guess it depends a lot on how somebody's psychology interfaces with what they're seeing. But the way that I think about it is when I'm drawing the figure, I'm trying to contend with the notion that the person is carrying a lot of weight, and that those dynamics of edge, that is the variabilities in the edge and the way that you model the edges, are more indicative of regions that are pressed heavier, pressed harder. And in the facial sense, they're not pressed all that hard. Sometimes they're stretched,
but there, I think that's kind of where I would take it. You know, in the face, we get the micro expressions, but those still don't lift a lot of weight, do they? They move things very, very slightly. So, you know, with the face, you're going to get a lot of texture, hair texture, eyebrow texture. But I do make it a point to try to be as broad-minded as I can about the nature of bony, you know, like the shift of skin across bone versus the skin that is on top of, you know, fatty tissue or muscular tissue. That is a different edge. It's a good question.
So I'm trying to set the cranial form up. And get the perspective to work as best I can. And a lot of this is kind of like thinking about a hat or a dome, up and over the top, not only this way, but also that way. So we were talking today about the zygomatic and about the influence of the bone, and this is a great opportunity to play around with that in terms of looking for things. So I can push up against the notion of where I think it is by adjusting the edge. And keep in mind, as we talked about today, we're playing this side off of that side. If I push it too far, I'll just bring it back. It doesn't really matter. But the important thing, again, is to have the freedom to select, to revise, to reselect, to eliminate. There's just so much going on, you know, the way that things settle in a diagonal sense as you drop the eye that way versus the eye this way, you know. It's just a lot to look for. And the foreshortening that these kinds of things contain is also crazy interesting, but also quite difficult to contend with. So that pulls the zygomatic a bit lower. A lot of what's going on here is the tapering going down to my mouth. Again, it's really quite fun to try to take on. So I've got this pocket here that empties into the corner of my mouth. And I want to pull that information just a little bit lower so the shadow falls upon the lower lip. And there again is that manipulation of the shapes. It's not there yet, but it's getting a little closer. But it's a kind of a larger format relationship quest. I think that's what we're all after. Get the kind of big poetry to happen.
And that was 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll keep going. I'm just going to keep rolling with the drawing, obviously. So if anybody has a question, let me know. And if you have to leave early, I appreciate you being here.
Do you want me to time 20?
Yeah, please. I think what we're going to do tomorrow is push this a little further in the workshop and just continue the dialogue about tomorrow's discussions about modulating asymmetry, which is another really interesting thing. I'll try to share some stuff on that regarding things you can do to try to maximize your expressive potential in the head because of the inarguable characteristics of changing, shifting midlines in your portrait. Everybody has it. see what I'm doing essentially is just kind of going after forms that are embedded. This is a good one here because its location is so key and interesting with regard to the way it formats the head. It's not a bad thing at all to get intrigued by this type of form, because it shows your prowess with the head and your expertise and your enthusiasm for the body. And you can do a solid ear. So you see me just outlining it. I'm still going more designer friendly on it, meaning I need to leave some room to maneuver it. That's kind of the same thing I'm always doing. I like to keep my options open as best I can. You doing okay, Catherine?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Don't want to activate this area too much because it becomes facial expression, but it is helpful to compare it. So it's a good way to draw the nose by looking at a shape next to the nose. So I push on that shape, pull it over a little bit. Okay, and then as I reach into this shape just a little bit, the objective is going to be to keep that pigment portion in the socket. So to get there, I want to advance this idea. That is that the socket is big and protected. So I can do that by separating this kind of mound in here of folded form, which makes me look really intense, I guess. That'll carry me around this side, right here as I turn the corner. Still not too dark or anything. So all I have to do is get these areas darker. And it winds up evening out a lot. I definitely want that tone to be in there. And the reason is I need the light to hit the edge of the socket up here. So that starts to make it happen a little bit. See? So then I can drop some more things back in space. There's a lot of emphasis in here on kind of stretch form.
Dan, there's a question.
Yeah, sure.
What kind of considerations will determine when you begin to focus more on values?
Well, as soon as I feel like the relationships of the forms themselves are set as they should be, things feel just slightly stiff and not quite settled. And once they get settled, then it's more so the place where values make the most difference than it is the values themselves. So I'm going to go in and make the value much darker in areas that are easy to manipulate, like the underside here. Good place to go for a value. Maybe in there, certainly here, but mostly there, because if I get this too dark, then it can be very problematic for making everything else work, because it turns into a kind of hole in the paper in a sense. So the neat thing about the value, though, is once it goes in, I could darken something now and show you what I mean. So, yeah, once this goes in, see what that does is it makes everything around it much, much lighter. We call that simultaneous contrast. So it's interesting because everything that's in here is renewed by the presence of this. And so I kind of see value as opportunity. I deepen the range gradually on purpose because I kind of like to test. I want a system that self-checks. It's almost kind of foolproof. And I get there by constantly going in and renewing the relationships and kind of putting those relationships up against each other, juxtaposing them. And when they read, they, after doing it several times, then it's time to go deep value. Like painting in a way, right? Well, this is a 7B I'm using right now. And it just goes in and sets things up. But what's also interesting about this selection here is I want to give myself as much of a rhythmic relationship as I possibly can. And suggest the mastoid process while I'm at it. So again, you see what that does to the rest of the piece is it makes everything else look so temporary. So whereas this might have looked kind of permanent and too dark and indecipherable, once the value is thrown in as a matter of tactics in the drawing, that is, we all learn to draw smart, then you can make a big difference. It's not so procedural as it may seem at the beginning. I rather like that about it.
And that was 20 minutes.
Okay. It looks like it's the end of the thing. It's so fast. I feel like I didn't get anything done, but if anybody has to split, I really appreciate you being here and spending Tuesday evening with us. And if not, I may go a little bit longer and just leave the camera rolling. So.
Someone said, but they direct messaged it to me, but they said, don't stop.
Oh, right. Sure. Well, I don't want to stop. I mean, it's not so much a kind of obligatory thing when we draw in a way that we love. It's fun. It's like what somebody said recently. This is the funnest thing that I do. So why do something else? And we have to make sure that we always affirm that by the things that we learn. The things that we learn are not meant to make the procedure more, again, obligatory or tedious in a sense that it obligates us to a certain kind of handling. But what they do is they feed our curiosity and our enjoyment of the beauty of other human beings. So, which is why we do portraits, right? Why we have portrait societies, because they're the best. No offense, landscape painters. So I'll keep going then. Unless there are any questions, I'll keep rolling.
Should I time another 20?
Yeah, please. I'll see how long I can make it in surgery recovery.
Hey, Dan, do you have a particular method of sharpening pencils to get to a fine point?
I don't really sharpen them to a fine point. I sharpen them to a kind of a blunt edge and a rounded point. And I do that because I want the pencil to feel a variable with its edge. I kind of feel like as I shift my hand on it, this is a weird analogy, but the way a violinist would shift their hand, or a pool player would shift
their English on the poll queue or something like that. So I very much don't want them to be super sharp. I like them to be sort of broad. And I just use sandpaper and Olfa knives. I don't use a pencil sharpener usually. So again, you see this darkened down. It's too much for the adjacent value, so I've got to go into the next value over and just kind of carve. So things don't feel like they're too contrasty. What that's useful for is it's going to drop the neck behind the jaw. Hopefully, anyway. Yeah, it's helping. It's actually helping a lot because what it does is it adds to the fluidity of the edge of the jaw. I'm going to carry this up and point it more toward the center. And I'm going to darken down some of the areas here. So you see again what that does is it makes everything else look like it's not developed nearly enough. So what I've got up here is a lot of breaking light. Still opportunistic and how the light can hit this side. So it's little bits and pieces of rearranged form. Probably I can afford to drop this. And I just keep going back into this area because of the foreshortening in that section and just how interesting that can be. It's a thickened section. It always is, right in the mouth there. Part of what makes it fascinating is the way that it points this way. So I always look for that on both sides. And I kind of see it.
Dan, that was 20 minutes.
Well, I can't guarantee going too much longer, but I might. Yeah, I'll just draw for a few, and then we'll cut it. But I'm happy to answer a question if anybody has something that they're dying to ask.
Ian, could I ask you what facial expression you're thinking about?
Yeah, I'm not giving it too much thought, Karina. It's because it is so unusual. It's almost like I'm not even drawing me. But the expression I'm getting is one of concentration.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you were asking about?
Yeah. There's definitely concentration, but there's attention and sweetness already in the facial expression.
You're saying my wife would like it.
Absolutely.
I hope so. But yeah, thank you. I don't know if it's I do know again that it's really helpful to have something that you take a break from and look at occasionally in opposite. So if you do that fairly often, it can really help, you know. So like I'm looking at it now and I can tell there are still little bits and pieces that I got to get more strongly indicated. I really want that nasal bone to be a more solid, believable indication. And a lot of that is what's still occupying my attention. Facial expression certainly is something we've been talking about in the other workshops. But it's almost like, it feels like you have to earn the facial expression to get through the structure to it at times. I'm sure you agree with me.
Oh yeah, it's so much to juggle that, and then you had such a long day and recovering, and it's amazing how masterfully it's all coming together.
Thank you for that. I guess I'm like anybody. I only see the mistakes.
Yeah, we're our own worst enemy, but it's really coming out really, really well.
Thank you. Well, we had a good time in facial expression, didn't we?
The best.
Hey Dan, I have a bit of a long question.
Yeah, what's that?
I'll just read it out. Is it difficult for your brain to judge values in the face when you look at your image surrounded by a dark backdrop in the mirror and draw on a paper with a light value background? I'm thinking you are so experienced that you can overcome this, but do you have any advice for others regarding how to focus and weed out the distraction?
The main interest that I have, and that I think anybody would probably wind up having once they've solved the value riddle, is form. So what I mean by that is value doesn't make any sense at all until you learn it through massing. And then once you really get it, once you discover what the massing means in terms of value orchestration, you almost can't unlearn it. It's yours forever. So the idea of looking at the value now, value would be a secondary thing. And so I'm thinking that I'm able to glance past the dark background because I'm so much more interested in the form relationships. To me, the form relationships are the things that are constantly testing you. And they're the things that you go back to and try to understand better and better as time goes on. So I would like to say that, you know, for example, if I decide that the form here projects more, I might darken the value to allow the form to project more. Or I might lighten the value to allow the form to project more. But at the end of the experience, if it's the form that takes precedence, the value becomes a byproduct. And that's what I always say. I hope that helps, but that is really what I practice. For a while, the value is a complete mystery. But again, once it's figured out, it's yours forever. So, I mean, I think that the worst part of it and the part that needs the most attention is the forehead. And it's probably because of the
all the uneven characteristics in my own forehead. But there's a lot to get into regarding this kind of thing. And again, I've got plenty of room, I think, in terms of value if I need it. I'll just darken these areas down here. But what this will allow me to engineer is that subtle relationship we've been talking about in the planes. So as I fold something through here, I make a separation. And I get that kind of blast, that splintering light coming off of that form. And so much the better, because there's a tremendous amount to get out of it when you split the forehead up into all these pieces of fairly symmetrical relative form.
Dan?
Yeah.
Amanda, who asked the question about values, says, wow, thank you. The light bulb just came on for me.
I didn't quite catch that. I'm sorry. What?
Amanda, who asked you the question regarding values, says, wow, thank you. The light bulb just came on for me.
Oh, great. I appreciate that. Yeah, the form thing is the real mystery. And but it's a mystery that pays. It just keeps you coming back for more.
And that's why we study anatomy. Get better at our form and to solve the riddle of the body. And then once you solve one riddle, you want to get into 16 more. But thank you. I'm happy it helps.
There's a question. Are there any guidelines or rules about the direction of lines while hatching, while developing form?
Well, the biggest guideline is the perspective. So if I go that way and then this way, which I've tried to do, I didn't do it as much in the demo tonight, but the biggest guideline is that, to operate in abeyance of the block. And the block is the initial, it's like the principal organizing feature of the entire head is the block. Once you get past the block, the thing to always think about, in my opinion, is sculpture, and how if you were to sculpt this type of thing, how would you manipulate your marks? How would you take your marks and traverse the form? So you see me going in these directions up and there, up and around. And I think that's important to consider, as you build up your aptitude for how you carve the body. The body has to be carved with a pencil. So it's sounds like a weird thing to say, but I do think at the end of the day, it's an interdisciplinary enterprise between sculpture and drawing. And I think in this double mirror tradition, I think a lot of you are going to find tomorrow, especially, that you're drawing yourself much more lifelike than you may have in the past, because you're seeing the reverse of yourself and you're not met with that residual self-image idea. It's quite interesting. What I want to do is to get that ear to press more. Which is going to be helpful. I think that's the other thing that I'm not crazy about right now here. So what I'm trying to do with that is to lift up that panel of the ear, so to speak, and to get that catch point there to adhere and to work in a kind of contributory sense with the angle of the jaw. So I go after mark making going like this and like that, And I pursue mark making up in here. That will help as well. That's going to lead me back into this region. That'll help get the ear to configure. That's a little better, I think. I guess I have big ears. Oh well. One last thing I want to do before we close down for the night is adjust this region because it doesn't look like it's in sync. And so it's not a hard thing to do necessarily, but it is important that you get yourself situated. What I usually do, I would do this now, but I'm on a video camera. So I take my shirt off. You can move my shirt around, but really want to take a good look and see what your clavicles are doing. It's just knowing the edge perimeter business to make a much more powerful head. It's weird how much it contributes, but it really does.
Dan, it says, are you using carbon powder when you're using the stump?
Graphite powder? No, not really. I just use what's already there. But you get my point about the whole clavicle thing? Because it'll really help. Once you pull your shirt down, you're more aware of the possibilities. And the head always gets that much more expressive.
Well, and that will help you lock in the position of your shoulders, which will anchor the head also, right?
Correct, yeah, exactly right. So it just takes a little bit, but again, you're dealing with this really interesting little pocket. I'm not sure if I'm going off camera. I might be. Let me see if I can zoom out a tiny bit. There we go. So here's the region. So if that functions as it could and probably should, this whole softer mass will float up into the respective place it's supposed to go. And it'll feel more like an avalanche, like you get the speaking likeness of the person. Can't pull it off 100% tonight, but that's the way to do it. And I like that about graphite, that it takes a while to build up. It's not a super fast medium because it's so determinative. You have to sit on it and kind of let it develop. So that's a really important thing. So I stick that right there. That should help me set the eye, which we can finish tomorrow. So there's that avalanche I'm talking about.
Dan, the question from Leslie. Will you demonstrate the kind of how to use your clavicle in tomorrow's workshop?
If you guys don't mind me taking my shirt off, sure. I don't mind.
Also do a tank top.
What? What are you saying?
We don't want to make you shy.
No, I'm good. If you're good, I'm good.
Just making sure you're awake.
No, I don't have any. There are no limits here in the Staten Island studio, so we're good. There's no policy directive like what you may think. But it really is, believe me, you know, an important thing of getting all this to work. This stuff is great. This is one of the greatest bones ever invented. So we'll talk about it tomorrow if you want.
Sounds great.
It'd be fun. I think I want to close it down at about 9:45. Oh, there it is, 9:45. I want to put the kids to bed, and I don't want you all to be up so late that we wind up, you know, losing ground tomorrow. So what we'll do tomorrow is talk a little bit more about the use of the asymmetry in the portrait, and then the hatch mark and livening up the eyes. But I hope that you know, that was helpful, and I really appreciate you all being here. Any parting questions?
It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Great demo. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure that you